When Surging Sparks first released, many people, including myself, thought that it wouldn't change the trading card metagame very much. However, since we've seen at the Sacramento and Stuttgart regional championships, there are definitely a couple of new archetypes and a couple of old archetypes resurfacing, changing up the metagame. And so in today's video, I'm going to be talking about my top 10 decks since the release of Surging Sparks. I'm going to be talking about why I would and wouldn't play all the decks on this list, and I'm going to be providing what I think is the best list for each of these decks. So with that in mind, let's get right into the top 10 list. Coming in at number 10, we have Lugia V-Star, a staple of the Pokemon trading card game at this point, been one of the top 10 decks for a few years now. Usually we see it much higher than number 10. A couple things not going Lugia's way right now. Miraidon has come onto the scene as a very powerful deck, right? Iron Hand's going to be taking 3 prizes on your Lugia V, your Lumineon V, potentially on turn 1, which is going to be really bad. It's going to mean you can't fix the prize trade later on with that legacy energy that we've seen be so strong, right? Otherwise, Klawf seems like somewhat of an issue. Another way that your legacy energy is getting less powerful. Of course, if your Lugia V-Star or whatever Pokemon has legacy energy on it gets knocked out by poison, you don't get to activate legacy energy. Your opponent does get to take the full amount of prize cards. Also, they won't be activating gift energy, which is the main way this deck draws cards. So another bad matchup. Of course, Gardevoir, also a pretty bad matchup. We've seen Henry Chow's Gardevoir deck, which we'll also be talking about later on, playing Spiritomb, which Lugia really doesn't like to see. So maybe Gardevoir cuts its Spiritomb, all the Drago players cut their Temple of Sinnohs, and Lugia Sun runs, avoids all the Miraidons, and maybe hit some control decks, some Snorlax decks. That'd be really good. You could definitely see one still in the top 8, but I think there are 9 better decks than Lugia right now. As far as the list for Lugia goes, just going to stick with Kieran Farah's list. I think the double 2/2 Cincino line is really strong right now against turbo decks like Bolt, Klawf, Miraidon even. Just having an option to use a 1 prizer is really important. If you discard 1 or prize 1, you still need to be able to do that. Otherwise, just max consistency, 4 research, 4 boss. Not much else to say about this, just a classic Lugia list. Up next on our list, we have Raging Bolt coming in at number 9 now. This deck, of course, a staple of the Pokemon standard format for a while now, but I think there are a couple things going against it. Of course, Miraidon has been seeing a lot of success. Miraidon has historically been a very good matchup for Raging Bolt, but with the addition of Pikachu EX, Area Zero, and Magneton, the deck is much better at trading 2 prize cards, and I think that matchup has come down to more of a 50-50 matchup, just based on going second, so that's a big downside for Raging Bolt. Also, I think some of its worst matchups are positioned fairly well right now. Of course, Charizard always been a fairly bad matchup. We just saw Charizard showdown in the finals, 2 Charizard decks at Stuttgart, so that's not great for Raging Bolt. Lost Box. Now, Lost Box is a little bit of an interesting one. We'll talk about that later, but again, another bad matchup. Lots of 1 prizers. The Blood Moon, the Pikachu can come in, one-shot all your 2 prize Pokemon. And then, of course, Terapagos, which has proven to be a bad matchup as well. We've seen Raging Bolt players try to incorporate the Bravery Charms so that they don't get knocked out by Terapagos, but I don't think that is really enough to make that a good matchup. However, the biggest strength of the deck has a strong Regidrago matchup, right? Now, Regidrago, of course, no spoiler to you guys, it's going to be fairly high up on my list, so having a strong matchup against one of the best decks in the game, going to be a huge upside. Then, of course, there's a couple more 50-50 matchups. I already mentioned, I think the Miraidon matchup is pretty 50-50. I think the Klawf matchup is also very close. Just Klawf benches a lot of 2 prize Pokemon, so if you go second and you're able to knock out a bunch of 2 prize Pokemon, should be feeling fairly good. And then also the Lugia matchup, I think, is fairly 50-50. So definitely a solid deck. Probably not one of my top picks, as you can tell from it coming in at number 9. As far as the deck list goes, we're just going to be rocking Caleb Gedimer's regional champion list. We've got the triple Bravery Charms for the Terapagos matchup. We've got the Slitherwing in there, being able to knock out Pikachu EX, very important. We've got the Iron Bundle. I think that's like almost a mandatory tech. Very good against Regidrago. I think more decks should incorporate this card, right? We see Miraidon play it. We see Klawf play it. Any deck that can attack turn 1, I think, should be playing this card. Very good at getting around things like Cleffa, for example. And then otherwise, pretty standard Raging Bolt list. The Lumineon, of course, a nice consistency card. I've really liked this. And then just cutting down on the energy cards, just 5 grass, I think is completely okay. Coming in at number 8, we have our first cool deck of the tier list, our first new deck. It's going to be Gholdengo. Specifically, Gholdengo Togekiss, I think, is really the premier archetype. I really like this Togekiss card. I think a lot of people are kind of hesitant to play it because it does rely on a coin flip. But I think to get the impact, you only need to flip heads maybe 1 in 3 times. Right? You attack 3 times, you knock out a 1 prize Pokemon and then 2 prize Pokemon. If you get 1 heads, there's your 6 prize cards and you're good to go. So as far as the strength for the deck goes, Miraidon, a very good matchup. They just kind of struggle to take knockouts. Of course, they're going to have an Ampu very much to knock out maybe a Gimme Ghoul or whatever, but then you evolve all your Gimme Ghouls into Gholdengos. You make sure not to put down that Fezandipity EX or any extra Gimme Ghouls. And then they have to make some big Raichu plays, so I think that matchup pretty good. The Raging Bolt matchup also pretty good. You go from like this 1 prize board state, just like a bunch of Gimme Ghouls. They take 1, and then you evolve all your guys, take 2 prize cards, and you just kind of start this 2-2-2 race that they can't really beat. Terapagos, also a fairly solid matchup, right? Terapagos can't knock out Gholdengo. As long as you don't put down things like Fezandipity EX, you should be good to go there as well. As far as weaknesses, Regidrago, I think, is a fairly bad matchup. Of course, a Dragapult able to knock out your Togepi if you put it down. Hawlucha, Dragapult also able to knock out your Gimme Ghouls. Kyurem, another issue. And then, of course, Lost Box, I think, is another issue for similar reasons. They have really a lot of tools to beat you, right? They got the Pikachu EX to one-shot you. They've got the Sableye, which can start picking on your Gimme Ghouls. They have Cramorant, so they almost always get the first attack. And I guess they also have Iron Hands. And you just don't trade very well into Lost Box in my findings. Now, if you set up the Togekiss, you do got a bit more of a chance there. Taking a look at the list, it's heavily based on Victor de Velasco's list from the Sacramento Regional Championships. I did cut the Canceling Clone. I think that, I don't know, it seems okay against like Mimikyus and stuff like that. And of course, it's good against Pikachu EX, but I think the deck's going to be losing to Lost Box anyways. So I kind of like just cutting the Canceling Clone, playing some more consistency cards. I got the Roxanne in there. I think that's what I added. I really like the option of having Hand Disruption. And then otherwise you see the Manaphy, of course, protect yourself from Kyurem. Don't want to make it too free for Drago to just wipe your board. Iron Bundle, again, this is going to be a theme. This card very good right now, specifically against Regidrago. And then we see the Energy Search Pro, super cool. Just 1 of each energy lets you get those turn 2 attacks off a little more frequently. At number 7, we have Gardevoir, one of my favorite decks. Every time I have to put this deck on the bottom of the tier list, it feels bad. So we got it at number 7, maybe a little bit of bias here. But as far as the strengths goes, Raging Bolt, great matchup. Historically, it's always been good. Nothing's really changed there. Your 1 prize Pokemon are just really efficient at trading with Raging Bolts. The Klawf matchup favored for the similar reason, right? Your Drifloon is just really able to trade into things like Terapagos or really anything sitting on the bench, right? There could be Latias, there could be a Fezandipity, there could be a Squawkabilly, right? Tons of Pokemon that you can uptrade into. The Lugia matchup, super favorite as well. Of course, we got that Spiritomb in there to shut off Lumineon V, Weirdeer V, and then Drifloon is going to be able to uptrade in that matchup as well. And then Gardevoir EX can also get in there once the Cinccino's are all dealt with. And then the last strength for this deck, Klefki. Klefki gets this deck so many free wins, it's kind of crazy. If you think about the amount of decks that don't really deal with a Klefki start, right? We got Raging Bolt doesn't like a Klefki start. Miraidon really hates a Klefki start. Lost Box hates a Klefki start. Klawf hates a Klefki start, right? So many decks, or Regidrago also hates a Klefki start. Almost the entire format relying on these basic Pokemon's abilities, right? The Ogerpon, the Squawkabilly, the Fan Rotom. Those are the most prominent ones. And then for weaknesses, Regidrago, I don't think this matchup is super good. We did see Henry take down Isaiah Bradner and a couple other guys in a show match. So that was pretty cool to see, but I don't think the matchup is actually that good. The Regidrago player can just kind of play really slowly, use Jamming Tower, and that's really bad for you. The Lost Box matchup, also pretty bad. Of course, you can tech for this if you include the Flutter Mane, right? Like I mentioned, Klefki is really strong. The problem is that the second you retreat out of your Klefki and attack, the Lost Box player will pop off and get a bunch of cards in the Lost Zone, start using things like Sableye or Pikachu, Greninja maybe if they're playing the water energies. So, but if you play Flutter Mane, you can keep that ability lock up all game. So that's a potential inclusion in the deck if you're worried about these Pikachu Lost Zone decks. And then, of course, the Klawf Donk is very concerning. If you go second against Klawf and you start Ralts, you're almost always going to get donked. I think they literally just need to put down Oranguru, and then they can Oranguru for Sealstone, all the tools, Pecharunt, and just get the knockout for free. So as long as Klawf can retreat into an Oranguru, you're donked, which is pretty scary considering how many frail Pokemon you play. As far as the list goes, we're just copying Henry Chow's list from, I think this was the Louisville Regional Championships, if I remember correctly. I think he also played the exact same list at LAIC, and I imagine he'll be playing the exact same list at Toronto again. So we'll see how he performs there. But a couple things to call out. The Spiritomb, of course, very strong against Lugia. Also pretty strong against Charizard. Helpful for shutting down Rotom, but also Lumineon, right? We don't want to get Briared at the end of the game. So the game plan is kill the Pidgeot, put down Spiritomb, and then maybe they'll be kind of unable to play the game. Otherwise, the list is fairly straightforward. We've got the rare candies, the Pheasantipede, the Professor's Research, the triple Earthen Vessel, really just making this deck a little bit faster, which I think it really needs to be, as many decks in the current format are going fast, right? Things like Miraidon, things like Terapagos, Klawf, right? You don't want to be getting attacked multiple times before you're able to get that Gardevoir EX up. You're just going to fall too far behind. So really like this rare candy build right now. Up next at number 6, we have the Klawf deck that we've been talking about a little bit already. Now, this deck is new from Surging Sparks. Of course, Klawf and Terapagos not from Surging Sparks, but I think the biggest thing is that Latias EX is from Surging Sparks, and that really gives this deck the mobility it needs. Also, the Precious Trolley, allowing this deck to really fill its bench on turn 1, and I think that's a huge buff as well. Talking about the strengths of the deck, Regidrago is a pretty good matchup. This deck kind of falls into the category of these turbo decks, right? These Miraidons, Raging Bolts. We've seen like the Roaring Moon EX decks that just attack turn 1, knock out a Regidrago V, and can be really hard to come back from that as a Regidrago player. Another strength of the deck is the Snorlax matchup. Pretty much an auto win. You've got the Pecharunt EX, which just gets you into your Pecharunt Poison and can ping them for 8 damage counters a turn. So that matchup going to be pretty good. Another strength is the donk potential, right? I mentioned it when we were talking about Gardevoir, but there are a lot of decks that you can donk, and especially most of your bad matchups you're able to donk, right? You've got Gardevoir, you've got Charizard, you've got Terapagos is another matchup that I don't think is particularly good. And all of them play a lot of 70 HP basic Pokemon. So if you get to go first, you can definitely scam some of your bad matchups just by, donking a Hoot twice, right? That's a very real win condition. Another big asset to the deck is being able to deny Pheasantipede, right? If you knock out a Pokemon with the effect of poison and not the effect of the attack, you actually knock out your opponent's Pokemon between turns, and then your opponent can't use Flip the Script, which we've seen to be a format-defining ability, right? 3 cards a turn is a lot, so being able to deny that option is very powerful. Then the weaknesses, kind of already mentioned them, all these kind of evolution decks with big Pokemon. Charizard, of course, we can one-shot that with the super effective glasses on the Hisuian Electrode, but we can only do that once. Terapagos, the reason the Terapagos matchup is so bad is that almost every game, they're going to be able to pop a Dusknoir on something and Briar for that kind of 4 prize combo that we've seen from Terapagos, and there's nothing you can really do to stop that. So that one's not particularly good. And then Gardevoir, of course, if they start Klefki, it's a disaster. And otherwise, they just kind of uptrade into you with Drifloon, and there's nothing you can really do about that. So talk about the list. We've just got Robin Schulz's list from the Stuttgart Regional Championships. We see the Genesect in there, which I think is a really nice inclusion. Just denying Prime Catcher in a lot of matchups is super relevant. I guess you could also deny Precious Trolley in the mirror matchup, and just generally you got a bunch of tool cards in your deck, you're going to be Precious Trolleying to fill your bench anyways. Might as well shut off our opponent's ace spec. I think that's a super good, cool inclusion. We've got the Petron Donk package, right? We see the Petron DX, the Petron Poison, the Sneasler. That allows us to get donks on, Ralts, Charmanders, Hoot Hoot. Then we've got the Oranguru Latias package, right? Turn 1, you Nest Ball or you Precious Trolley out that Oranguru and that Latias, retreat into the Oranguru, get all your tools. Really just a very robust engine. Then we've got our attackers, the Klawfs, the Terapagos, the Blood Moon, the Electrode. The Electrode really just in there for the Charizard matchup. It might even be worth just cutting this Electrode and these glasses because I don't think you're beating Charizard anyways. So might as well play 2 more consistency cards. I don't know, even like a 4th Arven and I don't know, a 3rd Ultra Ball or something could be a good idea. But otherwise, I really like this deck. I think it's pretty underrated. And especially the ability to deny Pheasantipity, I think, is really powerful. And we see that with Regidrago and how strong that is there. So keep an eye out on this deck. It might skyrocket up the tier list in the coming weeks. I'm not entirely sure, but right now, just going to be coming in at number 6. Coming in at number 5, we have Terapagos Dusknoir. Now, at one point, this was the number 1 deck on my tier list, but it slipped down a little bit for a couple reasons. One of those reasons is the Miraidon matchup. I don't think that matchup is particularly good. Now, if they ever pop the Magneton, the matchup gets very good because then, of course, you can just go take a knockout and then Briar take another knockout and you win the game. But if the Miraidon player is a little savvy, never uses the Magneton, they can kind of just go 2-2-2 on you, right? Raikou is going to be hitting for a ridiculous amount of damage at all times, probably just one-shotting your Terapagos, definitely one-shotting your Pidgeot, which is really how you play the game. Iron Hand's going to be taking out your Duskull, is going to be taking out your Hoot Hoot, so they almost always have an option for 2 prizes, and sometimes you don't, right? That Iron Hand's 230 HP, you only do 220, so that can be annoying. Might need to see the Vitality Band come back into this deck, but you've also got to be playing some other cards, right? Like, you have to be playing the Bouffalance at this point, because without the Bouffalance, you don't really beat Regidrago, and that's something I really value, so just a lot of problems, and it's hard to address all of them at the same time. Gholdengo, also another issue, right? We don't really deal with Gholdengos very well. 260 HP, can't knock those out. Really hard to maintain the prize trade when they one-shot us and we can't one-shot them. Klawf Donk, it's going to be on a lot of slides here. You can get donked by Klawf, and it's very annoying. I did actually get double donked by Klawf Petron before Precious Trolley came out, I guess before the deck was so meta. I got double donked, and that was not a fun time. But the strengths, generally, Klawf is going to be a good matchup, right? As long as you don't get donked, you're just going to be able to pull off that 4 prize Briar turn, right? Like Dusknoir onto a Klawf. If your opponent's on odd prizes, you use the Dusknoir, get them on even, and then you play the Briar, knockout, pretty much anything. They're going to have like Latias, Pheasantipity, Oranguru. Maybe they got the Petron down for whatever reason, but they're going to have a ton of Pokemon you can easily knock out. So that matchup's going to be pretty good. Raging Bolt, of course, has always been good. Same idea, that 4 prize Briar turn, just going to be really strong. You can also set up a 1 prize board state on turn 1. Just don't put down that Terapagos. And then on turn 2, you put down that Terapagos, you bring in an Ogerpon, knock it out, and you're going 2-2-2 while they're stuck on odd prizes. And Lugia, of course, I think another good matchup. This one doesn't matter too much, as I think Lugia is pretty weak right now. But another strength of the deck is just that there's a lot of decks not on this slide that are just close matchups, right? Decks like Regidrago, for example. Charizard, I think, is fairly close. Gardevoir, fairly close. I don't think this deck has a lot of terrible matchups. It's got a decent amount of close ones. As long as you're playing the Bouffalance, I think that puts in a lot of mileage right now. So here's the list. It's just the list Isaiah Bradner played to LAIC. Credit goes to him, but also to Tord. Tord was kind of the original designer of this deck with the double Bouffalante and the thinner Dusknoir line and all the healing cards. So I think this list is pretty good. I might cut the Turo from it. Maybe you get the Vitality Band back in there. Then you probably would lose to control decks, but that's maybe a trade-off I would make. Otherwise, pretty standard. I think the Thornton is a must-play with the only 1 Duskull. I also would love to see 2 Duskulls in the deck. Sometimes you're setting up for that 4 prize Briar turn, and you can only have 1 Duskull. It's a little awkward, so That's maybe one other thing I would love to have. But otherwise, I think this list is pretty stock, and I wouldn't change very much from it. At number 4, we got Charizard, another staple of the Pokemon Standard format. I feel like this deck is in a pretty solid position right now, as we definitely saw at the Stuttgart Regional Championships, showing up both of them in the finals. So for strengths, Raging Bolt, very good matchup. Klawf, a very good matchup. We've talked about those already. Also, it's got a lot of 50-50 matchups and a lot of like slightly favored ones. Miraidon, I think, is like a slightly favored matchup. A lot of people think that matchup is like a landslide for Charizard. I don't think that's really true. I think it's relatively reasonable for Miraidon to find a way to go 2-2-2, especially if Charizard puts down like the Rotom, the Pheasantipede, the Pidgeot, right? All these Pokemon that can really just get knocked out by Raikou, really, which is only 2 energies. Then you got like the Iron Hands, which is going to be taking a 2-prize KO and can potentially get up to that Raichu with the Magneton. As for the weaknesses, really the biggest weakness is going to be Regidrago. If you go second and Regidrago doesn't use their V-Star, they go for a Dragapult attack, they knock out your Pidgey, they take 2 prizes. I consider the game like pretty much over, so I think that matchup's pretty bad, and even if they don't get that turn 2 attack, they can always use just Cleffa, and then if you knock out the Cleffa, you're on odd prizes, which is fairly bad. So I mean, we're at number 4, and you guys still haven't seen Regidrago, so it's going to be one of the top decks for sure, and definitely not a deck that I would enjoy losing to. So it's a pretty big weakness. And then, of course, the Klawf Donk. We've talked about that. As for the list, I'm really enjoying Jackson Ford's list from LAIC. He's running that secret box, which I find really cool. Not a lot of people catching on to this. We've seen a lot of unfair stamp, but I really do think this card is good, allowing you to get like that jamming tower. I think really swings the Gardevoir matchup, the Sinnoh. Maybe don't need to play the Sinnoh, but even just being able to search out the stadiums, I find very impactful versus decks like Klawf or Terapagos, just limiting their bench with that collapse. Very strong. Also, being able to search out Thornton, right? You can go like Secret on turn 2. You can go Secret Box for Thornton, Sealstone, Rare Candy, and whatever stadium, I guess. But, right, that's a Charizard out of nowhere. And I think against decks, like Drago, maybe ripping a Kyurem on you, or maybe some deck ripping like a Dusknoir on a Charmander and then like kill the other one. Being able to actually Thornton is very important to me. So I like that secret box in the deck. Otherwise, pretty standard Charizard deck at this point. We've seen a lot of Charizard decks move to this 3-1-2 Charizard with 5 fire energies. A little bit greedy, but I think I can get on board with it. Especially with the Night Stretcher, I think is a worthwhile inclusion. So just a strong deck. Nothing too crazy going on with Charizard right now, but it does make our top 5. Coming in at number 3, we have Lost Box Pikachu. Now, I think this deck is actually very underrated. Of course, the weakness of the deck is that it does not beat Regidrago. I've heard some people say like, oh, like you got the Pikachu, you can kill the Drago. No, this deck still does not beat Regidrago. I'm even debating just cutting the Manaphy and just fully accepting the loss because this matchup is still bad. And then, of course, Klawf Donk, right? We want to be starting Comfey. We don't want to be starting any of our 2-prize Pokemon. So even just the threat of getting Klawf Donked is really annoying, especially if you're forced to go second, of course. But the strengths are abundant. Raging Bolt, a good matchup, like we mentioned before. You play the 1-prizers, then you go into the Blood Moon, the Pikachu. You trade really well. Miraidon doesn't have a way to answer Pikachu EX, so if you just put up Pikachu EX as soon as possible in the game on turn 2 maybe, and you knock out their Iron Hands, you force them to play a lot of gusting effects and set up a lot of Iron Hands, right? Imagine maybe you go first with Lost Box, you do nothing, they Iron Hands, you go Pikachu. In order to take 2 prizes and stay on pace, they have to go like Iron Bundle, make another Hands, then you go Pikachu, and then they go Iron Bundle, make another Hands. Like, that's a lot of energy cards, it's a lot of Iron Hands. Kind of hard to do, so that matchup going to be pretty good. Charizard, another pretty good matchup. If you play the Greninja, you can Ninja their bench, you can Sableye their guys, you can Pikachu the Charizard. Tons of options versus Charizard. I think this matchup's pretty good. And then generally, I think the Klawf matchup also fairly good if you're able to not get donked, right? You go first, you get down some Comfeys, or you go second and maybe don't start Comfey. I think you're going to be able to trade really well into them. Even though they got the poison to knock out the Pikachu EX, I think you can leverage your 1-prize options to make the prize trade favorable.
As far as the list goes, I played this list to a League Cup recently. I got second place, and I felt fairly confident in the list. I don't really like the Water Energies or the Radiant Greninja. I find myself using the energies in the early game just to retreat, get extra Comfy activations, get into that Cramorant. I didn't find myself nest balling for Radiant Greninja too often. The nest balls in this deck actually work as a resource. If you use all your nest balls, it's pretty impossible to find things like Sableye or Blood Moon in the late game, so you want to be holding on to as many nest balls as possible throughout the game. Never really liked to nest ball for the Greninja, and I definitely didn't like the water energies. Otherwise, not playing the Ninja, not playing the waters, just lets you maximize consistency. We see 4 Poffins, 4 switches. A lot of decks have 3 of those. Really like to see the max counts of those. And then otherwise, I think a fairly standard Lost Zone list. At number 2, we have Miraidon. Now, as you can see, the strength list here, just absolutely full of decks. Lugia, going to be a near auto, and Regidrago, also a very favorable matchup. Now, you do have to protect yourself from the double Kyurem, but you got the Bravery Charm to do that. So as long as you don't get double Kyurem, should be very favorable. Take out a 2 prize Pokemon on turn 1, and then just keep tempo throughout the game. Similar to the way Raging Bolt plays against Drago, but I think Miraidon actually does it a bit more consistently. Gardevoir, also a pretty good matchup, right? You got Iron Hands on turn 2, and if they're not able to answer that right away, they're going to fall very far behind. And Terapagos, which we've talked about as well, fairly strong matchup. As far as weaknesses go, Snorlax is the biggest weakness. That's just going to be a complete auto loss. There's no switch cards in the deck. It's relying on Latias and Rescue Board to pivot, so bunch of guys that can get trapped. And then Lost Box, I don't think this matchup's actually that bad. Like, we did talk about the Pikachu EX and how that's hard to deal with. Maybe you include a Canceling Clone. Or maybe you just set up the 3 Iron Hands, right? It is possible. It's 12 energy cards, right? The way I think of it is you got 12 energy cards, you got 3 turns, so that's 3 attachments. That means you got to get 9 energy cards in play. We get 3 for Magneton. That means we've got to get 6 more. And so our 4 generators have to find us 6 lightning energies, which is pretty reasonable. Definitely not impossible. You do have to draw into all your generators, and they do all have to hit fairly reasonably. But there is definitely a route to victory there. As far as the list goes, should be no surprise. We're just copy-pasting Landon Caitler's list. If you want to hear more about this deck, I have put out some content already on this deck. Landon and I did an interview video, and then I went and played a league challenge with the deck, which went pretty well. So if you are interested in this Miraidon deck, be sure to check out those other videos, as I think it's a bit of a gold mine for some Miraidon content. And coming in at number 1, should be no surprise, we got Regidrago here. Come on, the titan of the format. This little, random red dude. Not a particularly cool Pokemon, but definitely a very powerful one. Strengths, tons of decks, all these evolution decks that just get ripped apart by Dragapult, right? Charizard, Gardevoir, Dragapult, and then of course Lost Box, right? We got Kyurem. Even without the Kyurem though, Dragapult, pretty good versus Lost Box. Goodra, also pretty good versus Lost Box. And I didn't put it on here, but another strength of the deck is just having so many options, right? You've got all these different dragon Pokemon. We've even seen the Alolan Exeggutor seeing some play nowadays. So a lot of room to adapt this deck and maybe play the tech cards you want. As far as weaknesses go, it's generally going to be these turbo decks, right? These decks that knock out your Regidrago on turn 2 and are able to maintain tempo throughout the rest of the game, right? So Klawf, Miraidon, Raging Bolt. Now, we do have some counterplay to this, right? Our Regidrago gets knocked out on turn 1. You go in with the Radzard, you play an Iono. Hopefully they don't have boss. If they do, we go in with the Radzard, we play another Iono, and we hope they don't have boss. So even against these turbo decks, you have a reasonable route to victory. The Klawf matchup can be annoying as you need to gust around the Klawf sometimes. You don't want to be knocking out 1 prize Pokemon. And then the Miraidon matchup, also very rough. Just they're so able to gust back to back to back. Now, here's the list I've been playing. Pretty much a couple interesting cards in here. First off, the Lost Vacuum. If we go back to Landon Caitler's list here, you'll notice there's only 1 Bravery Charm in the deck. So if we play a Lost Vacuum, what you can do, you can Kyurem, and then when they put down the Bravery Charm, you lasso on the Bravery Charm, you Kyurem them again, and you laugh in their face. Mwahahaha. No, don't do that. But you do get them, and they probably don't see it coming. So Velocity Vacuum is a cool little tech. Also just works to like bump stadiums or remove tools. Just not a terrible card. Otherwise, we've got the Iron Bundle, another kind of semi-spicy inclusion. We've seen this before, but it's very good in a lot of situations. Best in Mirror, right? When your opponent uses Cleffa, or maybe if they Goodra, you can get around that annoying Pokemon attack something more relevant. You can also use Iron Bundle to defend from other decks' Iron Bundles. So we've talked about how Klawf, Raging Bolt, Miraidon, Gholdengo. I think I might even be missing one, but all these decks playing Iron Bundle. And by having an Iron Bundle of your own on the bench, you protect yourself from Iron Bundle, right? So you can maybe have Cleffa in the active, Iron Bundle on the bench. And then if they don't bundle you later, you can pop that bundle, free up that bench spot, maybe put down your Pheasantipede, your Mew, another Ogerpon, whatever you need. So I am liking this Iron Bundle card. Otherwise, the list is pretty standard. No Alolan Exeggutor. That card is super fun, but I think there are just more valuable cards to be playing. Like when I think of either playing Iron Bundle or Exeggutor, I definitely like the bundle. So that's going to wrap it up for this Surging Sparks Top 10 video. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned something. And if your deck wasn't on this Top 10 video, don't get discouraged. Oftentimes, just having experience with a deck and enjoying it is going to be more valuable than whether or not it's on my top 10 list. But if I left your deck out, let me know in the comments down below. Give me a case for your deck, why it should have been on the list. And otherwise, I'll see you guys in the next video.